We have therefore initiated the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, ARC, a new movement of hopeful vision. Well, they say the people perish without vision. What is hopeful vision? Well, hopeful vision is what you're working toward. You know, you think, well, if I could have things this way in my family, in my life, in my community, that would be worthwhile. I could get on board with that. Well, your vision of the future that attracts you and also provides you with security and direction, orientation that unites you with others, that's your hopeful vision. And you perish without that. And hopefully through discussion and negotiation, we could develop something approximating a collective hopeful vision that we could all be on board with. Like part of that for me is, well, how about if we work as hard as we can, as quickly as possible to ameliorate absolute poverty? Provide inexpensive energy as widely as possible everywhere in the world and lift people out of the poverty that, what would you say, compels them to adopt a cataclysmically short-term vision of the world. Now, you know, you might say, well, that's not priority number one. It's like, fair enough, we could have a discussion about what priority number one might be, but that's, for me at least, an element of what might constitute a hopeful vision. And I think it's a realistic one too, given that rich people care more about the planet. They can afford to. So, aimed at the collective voluntary establishment of a maximally attractive route forward. Well, why maximally attractive? So that people will be on board without compulsion. Because one of our principles is all policy that requires compulsion is suboptimal. Now, you have to use compulsion on criminals now and then, psychopaths, people who just will not abide by any set of principles whatsoever, except the advancement of their extraordinarily narrowly defined self-interest. But other than that, if you set up an organization and people aren't willingly on board, you haven't developed your vision properly. And so we want to do that collectively in response to the questions that admittedly we are putting forth. Voluntary establishment, well, you get the best out of people if they're voluntarily on board. You know, you don't want to play a game with someone who's been forced to play with you. Now, that's the definition of fatal social catastrophe, even when you're a kid. You know, your neighbor's mother has to tell his son, your neighbor's mother, you have a kid next door you'd like to be friends with, and he won't play with you unless his mother tells you to. Well, tells him to. That's not going to be very fun for you or for him. You can't have an optimally structured social organization that relies on involuntary participation. So, voluntary establishment. The ARC will open itself up to widespread public membership as rapidly and extensively as is practically manageable, at as low a cost as is possible and desirable, because nothing's free. We're also announcing our first conference, slated for Greenwich, London, England, October 30th and 31st and November 1st, concentrating on issues metaphysical, cultural, and practical. So we would like this to be a beautiful conference. We'd like it to focus on elements beyond the political, cultural elements, philosophical elements, psychological elements, issues pertaining to the meaning of life, the significance of existence, and then also to become practical with regard to the realization of policy and to start that discussion. Some of this conference will be necessarily limited in its scale to 2,000 or so initial attendees. Some of it will be made open to as wide a swath of the public as possible. The happenings on both fronts will be made available online insofar as that is pragmatically possible, either live or recorded for later reading, viewing, or listening. We'll have 2,000 people there. I hope to do a public talk in the midst of that and at the O2, if we can get that arranged. We'll get something approximating 15,000 people to that and do a series of discussions in one evening about the fundamental issues that the conference is going to discuss. And as I said, we'll record the conference proceedings so that people who are interested can see what's going on. We'll do it live online as much as that's possible, but we're also not going to sacrifice the utility of the in-person meeting to that end. And then we'll try to expand that as we move forward. You know, you got to start not too on not too large a scale if you want to figure out how to make something work. We plan as well to render the operations of the Ark public and transparent, to operate under the assumption that each citizen has the inalienable right and is well equipped when engaged, informed, and consulted to choose and adhere to the desirable, sustainable, productive, and generous future path. So I'm hoping that everybody involved is wise enough not to think that they're the only person in the room or on the planet who's wise. You know, my sense of the world is that there are extraordinarily competent people operating at every domain, ranging from the sheerly practical wisdom of plumbers and carpenters and highway workmen and who do their job diligently and properly, complex though it is, to people who are operating in the realm of abstraction, and that for things to work out properly, everybody at every level has to value their productive capacity, be valued for their productive capacity, and be seen to operate as contributing members to the broader social endeavor and to be regarded as valid contributing members. And that's not some utopian dream, that's hard-headed reality. So the more people that participate and the more people we can consult, insofar as it's possible to aggregate a diverse range of voices, the better, as far as we're striving to be concerned. No, and so the sheer complexity of the world and the genuine diversity of individual ability and preference means that distributed decision-making is a necessity, not a luxury. No elite technocracy is capable of knowing best and then determining how we should all move forward as individuals and communities. It follows from this that policy requiring compulsion, let alone force, rather than the voluntary assent of the participants, is bad policy. We therefore offer for the contemplation of those potentially interested in our invitation 6 fundamental questions, the answers to which might form the basis for a vision that is voluntarily compelling, motivating, that moves you forward into the future, stabilizing, provides a certain amount of structure so that you're not overwhelmed by complexity, and uniting. Uniting in that if we all share the vision, or to the degree that we do, we're going to be moving forward in a manner that's mutually comprehensible, productive, stabilizing, and hopeful. Well, that'd be good. Domain 1, vision and story. What destiny might we envision and pursue such that we are maximally fortified against anxiety and despair, motivated by faith and hope, and voluntarily united in our pursuit of a flourishing and abundant world? Responsible citizenship. How might we encourage individuals to reflect and to act so that they adopt full voluntary responsibility for themselves, present and future? That's the difference between impulsive self-interest and wise self-interest, right? If you're wise, you act in the present so that the future you will benefit from your actions in the present. You don't do that if you're impulsive or hedonistic. How might we encourage individuals to reflect and to act so that they adopt full voluntary responsibility for themselves, present and future, as well as their families and communities? So that's that extension of individual responsibility from the bottom up, from the local upward, and how to encourage that, recognize it, fortify it, develop it, distribute it. Family and social fabric. So we're sort of moving up the hierarchy of society. How might we effectively conceptualize, value, and reward the sacrificial, long-term, peaceful, child-centered, intimate relationships upon which psychological integrity and social stability most fundamentally depend? Well, the minimal model for that is something approximating the nuclear family, right? Long-term, committed, stable, heterosexual marriages, sanctified by the community and by the tradition, providing the basis for for a mutually satisfying and engaging relationship for the adults involved, and offering the necessary minimal foundation for the security, for the creation and security of children. And so, well, we have to discuss exactly what that means at the minimal level. I'm particularly impressed, this is me, not ARC, by the way, with the Hungarian family policy provisions that have been put forward most recently. I think they're well worth considering. If you're a mother in Hungary, you have one child, you're exempt from income tax, 25% of income tax for the rest of your life. And that scales up to 4 children, 100% reduction. And I like that because, well, it helps redress the imbalance in relationship to reproductive responsibility that's part and parcel of the human existential landscape. And, maybe that's not a perfect solution, but it seems to me a variant of the solution that the feminists, to give the devil his, or in this case, her due, have been clamoring for forever, but certainly for the last 300 years.